Okay, we're going to be doing a live stream tonight about using strings inside Logic. We're going to look at some of the Logic instruments, but also we're going to look at some third-party things if we get in deep enough. If you like this kind of content, of course, don't forget to subscribe, hit that notification bell. And I've been saying this at the beginning of all the videos. We have our membership option now, which gives you bonus live streams. We're doing our next one tomorrow afternoon, Denver time. And of course, if you're looking for anything more in depth, then we do one-on-one lessons as well over Zoom. But what we're going to be doing tonight is really looking at some of these instruments. The Logic really got some new instruments. It's been years now, but they added some decent, dare I say, decent string and brass instruments. And so we're going to start there tonight and just go over those as a starting place, because I think that if you have no ability to buy any other string orchestral instruments, then these ones would have to do. And they can certainly work in a pinch. And I'll explain why I say a pinch in just a minute. I'm actually going to play the strings compared to, say, like a more professional library here. So here's the studio strings. These are the ones that come with Logic. And I'm going to add now just the East-West Hollywood string section for a moment. We won't do too much with this right off the bat, but I'm just going to pick like one of the overall full strings. Now, we have all of the individual instruments as well, but we're just going to literally just pick one of the overall banks so you can hear the difference. Okay, so I've got that loaded, and I've got the studio strings loaded. And with the studio strings, actually one tip I'll give you right off the bat is instead of loading the studio strings as a plugin, it actually makes more sense to come out to your library and choose one of the presets from here, either the Abbey Wood, the Bloomsbury, the Eden Park, Kensington, or King's Cross. Obviously all in reference to various things. Abbey Wood being a reference to Abbey Road. The reason for this is because if you just load up the instrument, then you're not going to get all of the articulation sets that automatically get loaded. You can still load them individually right here in our inspector. But if you do a preset, then you're going to get more stuff already set up. Okay, let me make sure. Got it loaded. Right? It sounds like strings to a certain degree, but do they sound amazing? No. Here's the East-West Hollywood. Right? Probably hear a little bit of a sonic difference. Now, of course, we pay more of a premium cost for the play, the East-West, or now we have from East-West the Opus version, which you get if you do like the Composer Cloud, and then you pay like monthly or yearly. It's not like tons of money, but for some people, anything extra is quite a bit of money. So, you get what you pay for to a certain degree. So let's talk more about, the Logic ones at first, because I do think that there are some things worth looking at with this. We're using one of the multi-output versions right this moment, which is why I've got the multiple different tracks here, the main, the violins, 1, 2 cellos. which means I can actually, mix them differently, but also we still have just the one main instrument, which is actually kind of nice because we have the ability to change some of our voicings, which is not something every plugin has, which means I can come through and say, let's do auto voice split. And what I play on the keyboard is no longer what's being played by the instrument. You can see we have split voicings, some different options, 8v8, drop 2 and 4, start by key split, or start with bass voice or lead voice. Here's the actual split key, etc. So we have some ability to make this sound more like a real string section, even though we're playing a keyboard. Just the overall sound is a little bit, in this particular preset, a little bit muffled in a way. Let me see what that's doing. Ooh, so they have it pre-programmed to one of my knobs to do. It's like ringing, self-resonating quite a bit there. Let's pull one of the other ones out. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about dynamics for a moment, because one of the best things about a stringed instrument, of course, is that you can, when you're bowing across a string, you can say, I want to go louder at any moment. It's a little harder with a keyboard, although we do have aftertouch. Unless you're using some sort of MPE device, though, the aftertouch is going to be across the entire instrument. Doesn't matter how many notes you're holding, it either goes or it doesn't for everything. So that doesn't help us as much. And so we need some other device with this. And I've got, let's see if I can pull this down without everything coming down. Yeah, here we go. So I've got a breath controller I use quite a bit. I also have one of the Touche devices that I really like. Let me see if I can separate this out. So breath controller, the Hornberg, this thing is a beast. And I don't even know if I'm going to hook it up right this minute or not. I probably should if we get into it. Because that's when we really have amazing string representations by actually changing the dynamics over time. So we do have with this instrument dynamics via CC, and then we can choose which of the CC we want. In this case, modulation. Let's pitch. Here we go. So on my keyboard, you can't see, but my mod wheel. So we have the ability to, change the dynamics real time. It's using a combination of like crossfading between samples and volume. And so, it's great. It's fine. I don't know, great is the word I was thinking of. But if we do auto split and dynamics, you get some interesting things every once in a while. So it's like I'm playing the same notes and it's moving things around. I find that sometimes I get more realistic performances when I do auto split, and other times just programming good old-fashioned MIDI is a better option. But if you just play like a keyboard, it's going to sound like a keyboard. And so the thing that I'll probably say with this, and the way that I'm going to play some of these in a way that makes sense is by adding a drummer track. Not necessarily because we want drums on this, but we're going to think of this maybe tonight a little bit more cinematically. This is something more like, one of the Bourne movies or something, something along those lines where we have the percussion elements and then we have like a string part that's mixed in with them. And do we have enough quality with this instrument to make it sound good? If someone asked me, can you make like the studio strings in Logic sound like an actual string quartet or a small chamber ensemble with no other instruments, I would find it hard. I'd find it hard to do. I think that there are some limitations. But before we get into some of the articulations and things, let me just play around a little bit with drum loop so that we have a little bit of that happening. And let me actually change the pattern a little bit so that it's a little bit more upbeat. Complexity, hi-hat pattern. Let's see. There we go. Okay, so already it sounds like it fits more than if they're just by themselves. That's fine. And we do have, I know, hello everybody who's in here right now for all the comments so far. No Destination really says, if you arrange each violin by itself on a separate track, it helps realism. Exactly. And especially your part about the triads on the keys, if you just... But if you think of them as lines, but that's, I think anybody who's like written for strings and understands what real strings, how they function, I think you could probably get closer, but certainly that there are still some limitations with the sounds of these. And then let's see. And Dave says, is Native Instruments standard a good option to add? Never used it yet. I don't use the Native Instruments myself. I love the Vienna stuff, and I love the East-West. East-West is what I typically use. And so as you're coming in, I'm always going to be comparing. This is the Logic sound. Compared to the East-West Hollywood strings. And that's just like the most basic of all East-West patches, just a simple orchestra. So that's not even like the parts broken out at all. So we're looking at something very different when we get into the Logic strings. They're not horrible, but they have some issues. And actually, Looking at this, this is the default. I feel like I need to scoop out some stuff here. I mean, that's not tons better, but it's a little bit better, I think. Okay. Okay, so that's what it is. Let's look at for a minute some of the ways to really increase the playability of this. So one of those things would be talking about the articulations, which we have all of these articulations right here. Sustain, staccato, spiccato, fall long, fall short, scoop, fast and slow, accented, sustain, crescendo fast, crescendo slow, forte piano fast and slow, pizzicato, trill with semitones, trill with whole tones, and then tremolo. So we have each of these things, right? So we can say staccato. Did that change anything? Let's see. Weird. So that, let me reload an instrument here. That seems like it's, instead of fighting it for a minute. Instrument, studio strings. Yeah, that's weird. Okay. And we'll switch this to one of the sections. Okay. Right, so you're hearing a lot of this. Okay, so we have all of those options. Again, focusing on studio strings, not because it's the best option out there, but for many people in Logic, it's the option. The only option, unless they buy something else. So, because I loaded this up just as a plugin, let me really quickly show you in our properties where, and this is under the track properties, at the very bottom it says articulation set. And we can go to Logic, Studio Strings, String Ensemble. That's an important step because that gives us a lot of functionality in, say, our MIDI. So let me just record something really simple chord-wise. So super simple. We're going to just do a smart quantization at the 8th note. And let's take a look at the MIDI, see what damage I have to fix here. There's a note there, a note there. Otherwise, we're okay, I think. So pull that. Oh man, let's see. Some of those may have a hard time triggering. We'll make that work. So here's the thing about articulation sets with this instrument, and something I wish that more people would do, although a few have done this, but I would still say it's relatively small. Once you enable this articulation set, I can come in here to these notes, like say these 3 notes right here, and on the left side I can click on this and say I want these to be staccato. So if we're listening to those, let's mute the drums for a second. it's actually able to switch to those different articulations. So let's switch these ones to staccato as well. And let's do smart snap. Let's just, well, super annoyed. Because I'm using smart quantization, some of the notes don't line up. Okay, so we could switch all of those over. But we can do this with any of them. So we say we want some of these to have a completely different thing. We could do pizzicato. We could say we want to make this chord the tremolo. And let's switch all of these ones to okay. More of a showcase of what it can do rather than perhaps the best example in the world. But then so those go to tremolo. They can all happen simultaneously, meaning we can have tremolo and pizzicato on the same region. Right? And so then we have to come through and actually do some stuff with like velocities, and we want to change maybe some of the feeling behind some of this. And so we can come through and say we want to do our modulation and draw in some of that, or even just record some of it in. So say I want to like record. Oh, that's not what I wanted to do. Undo, loop back on. And why is it doing that already? Okay, so we're going to switch in our settings of recording for MIDI cycle on. We're going to have it merge. That way, any of my controller data gets put right in there. And we're going to undo that for a second because one last thing, we need to turn on dynamics via CC. There we go. Forgot I'd reloaded the whole thing. So I can just write all that data in with my controller. And then the dynamics are controlled. So we have all these different tools to help make these things more realistic. You still have to understand, the physical principles of a string section. And you can come through and actually do what was already talked about in terms of recording one note at a time and just have a bunch of different instruments. That's totally workable as well. Let me see what some of the comments are saying. No Destination really says Sound Toys, Decapitator, and Devil Lock plugins help my string sound gritty and scratchy, but in a very fun. Okay, cool. That sounds awesome. And David H says useful for realism. Let's see, Mr. Polkvist. I don't know how to say that, but one of the channel members. Thanks for being here. Awesome. Just notice this, and this is not tomorrow's stream. Just so you know. This is just an open stream, and we'll have our members stream tomorrow as well. Cool. And then No Destination really says those volume dynamics automations drastically improve. Yeah. So I think all of this, you can get really useful things from it. But there are it's like a few step process, and one that I feel like is somewhat hidden behind the way Logic likes to do things. Meaning, instead of when you load up Studio Strings as a plugin, if you don't use the library, it's like really tricky to know to put the articulation set on there and all of the other stuff. Now, I will say, I don't know. We do have, or I should say, what I do know is that East West has also released articulation sets that when you install them, they come into Logic. And so we can do that with those as well, which I think is super useful. Let's find some example of this. We'll do a brass for a second. Let's see. Does low brass has key switches? That's nice. Let's see if they have the articulation for that. So brass, low brass, key switch master, the very bottom one. Okay. Let's get this softer. Right, so we have sustain, we have all of these different things. So let's record something unprepared. Oh, let's turn on the, it's always more fun with drums. Right, so we'll just do a hard quantization for that, quarter notes. And let's see what we have in terms of the key switches down here. So let's do these two. And you'll see we have sustain, accent, max. Let's try that. That sounds about the same. I don't know if I was expecting it to be totally different. Clusters blast. Oh. I didn't hear a lot of difference on that either. Let's hear some of these. See if they're actually doing. So it looks like it's not fully functional here. We just have these 3 key switches built in. I don't know what's happening with. It looks like that was the effects one. So let's switch over real quick to the effects. There we go. Oh, that's pretty weird sounding. I just want to see if I'm getting this working at all. Interesting. Ooh, clusters blast, elephants. Okay, so a little disconnect there with that particular instrument, but this illustrates one of the points I was making earlier. It feels like nobody's doing this right except for like 2 instruments inside Logic with the articulation things, which likely means it's a failed protocol on Apple's behalf and nobody's going to be doing it. So who knows? Okay, question from Ben. What is dynamic CC? So CCs are continuous controllers. It's what we use in the MIDI protocol to send non-note data, essentially. So for instance, let me delete that for a minute. I'll go back up to this instrument. So inside the bottom section, you can look at the dynamics controller. And because it's MIDI, there's 128 different numbers that get sent as this data. We use this data for so many different things. We use it for breath controllers, foot controllers, portamento, volume balance, expression pan. And then we have a bunch of things. LSB stands for least significant bit, which is not going to mean much to anybody about anything. But this data just goes along with the MIDI data, and so we can use it. But the mod wheel on your keyboard is typically number 1. And so 0 would be the most significant bit. Number 1 would be modulation. And so with it set up to modulation as number 1 and I turn it on, it means I can use my mod wheel, or in this case, mod joystick, because this keyboard has a joystick. And I can move it up and down. And then make it do what strings do, go louder and softer at any point, just depending on how they push the bow. And I wish I had one of my other controllers hooked up. I don't right now, but this is one of them, the Touche that I use. This thing is, like a 4-axis thing. Front and back go down. You can go side to side. This thing I use for string automation like this with controls so much. I have a breath controller too, but the breath controller relies on breathing. And so it's nice to be able to have 2 hands on the keyboard, but then you've got to like develop lungs of a swimmer essentially to make it work. And so, sure, it's really nice, but it's just a lot of like breath control at the same time. I don't think I have, oh, no, that's the wrong one. I'm seeing if I had a cable sitting around that I could just plug one of these in. But I don't think I do right this moment. So I won't do it. Another time. I have videos on these devices on my channel if you're really dying to learn about them. But cool. And so we get to make these sound as real as we want. There was a trick that I was using with this particular instrument, because I think part of it is when you change the EQ of it, it like changes too much of the instrument. Let me see if we have the Eventide split EQ installed and activated. This thing's amazing. If any of you have used split EQ before from Eventide, you'll know what I'm talking about. This thing is like revolutionized EQ for me in many ways, because what it does is it splits the transient material from the tonal material. And then we can actually, for instance, adjust the EQ of the string sounds without taking so much of like the actual transient stuff from the actual string sounds with the bow. And so you end up with these just really cool different sounds. So maybe I think it's a little boxy and I want to pull some of that out. I don't have to like do the body with the strings at the same time. Right there, I need another one with that low stuff. Compare that to without it. Subtle differences, which is what we want when we're EQing strings. We want subtle improvements, and that's what we get with something like split EQ that we can't get with some of the Logic EQs. Anyway, not an advertisement for split EQ. Although I do love Eventide, and I think that what they're doing is pretty awesome with this particular thing. They're not a sponsor. Okay, so let me think about the other things here. We have a few more things in terms of this actual plugin, in terms of making it sound a little bit better. We have like a filter here, and an attack and release. I don't do too much with those. We do have the vibrato controller, which is usually combined with what you're doing with the dynamics control, but you can certainly make those separate. And in this case, let's do aftertouch. So aftertouch is when you push down the keys a little bit harder. So you could get the vibrato by just pushing a little harder on your keyboard. It can get a little tiring on your fingers unless you have a good keyboard. Or many keyboards don't even have aftertouch still after all these decades. Right? Still playing like a piano, so let's try the split voicing. Oh, we gotta turn it on right there. I was like, that doesn't sound different. Played it the exact same way as I was a minute ago, but the voicings now sound more natural. And so there is a time and place for that. You just have to figure out exactly what it's doing and make sure that whatever you're playing is repeatable when you're playing it again next time. Okay, so let me think if there's anything else on here. Extended range is dumb. I think you should all turn that off. Because why would you want your strings to play more than real strings could if you want them to sound real? If you don't care about realism, then just turn the extended key range on. That just means it's going to play the imaginary notes past the edge of what a stringed instrument could do. And then the legato transitions. Let me turn off auto voicing for a second. That doesn't, I mean, there are certainly some things with legato transitions, more when you're doing like a mono type instrument. Let's switch this to like violins. And see, you'll see some different choices down here. Okay. I know. Not really hearing much of a difference there. I have heard that every once in a while. Oh, monophonic. That's probably why. Because with the strings, we don't have a monophonic button. Violins we do. Let's turn it on. And let's turn that. See, so this is exactly where it is. When I do it without that on, and I go from one note to the next, as opposed to turning this on, it like makes it sound smoother between those. And so if you are going to play this in monophonic mode, then you really, most of the time, want the legato transitions. Let's see how that does with something like pizzicato. I don't know if we're even going to hear much with that, but certainly with the sustain, it made a difference. At least I could hear it sounded more natural. Cool. Any questions so far? Let me know in the comments. This is a live stream, so you're all here the same time I am and can ask things. So let me know. We could switch over to the horn section for a minute, which is probably a stronger plugin than the strings. Let me switch my articulation set over here to something that's horn based. We'll do the tenor sax 1. I mean, we've got key clicks, humanization, auto vibrato, and a number of things down here. Monophonic is turned on. Let's turn on dynamics via CC. Let's change expressive medium back up to sustain. We could do volume vibrato with the mod wheel at that point. I mean, there's just this, I think this set of instruments, I know we're talking about strings, but this implementation in this format work better with the saxes and the trumpets and the trombones and the sections. So I think it's kind of interesting. Same release time, same form factor, but certainly one of them I think ended up being just slightly better for the format in terms of the original samples and everything. Okay. Let me think about anything else with this. We do have some other instruments inside Logic. We do have, let's pull these out. I'm going to turn on patch merging for a second so I don't load up a bunch of extra stuff. But we have like strings in here. And this loads up in the sampler. Those sound horrible. That sounds a little better, but not by a ton. These ones also have, no, they don't have anything. I forgot. They don't have any articulation stuff. Let me go back to the other instrument for a second. I remembered one thing that I was going to show you in terms of this. Because we have the articulation sets, let's edit this one for a moment. You can actually see inside the articulation sets one thing that's really, really nice. And that is we have the ability with cymbals to do this with a score. So I know some people say, I wish I could do this with the notation feature in Logic. And the truth is you can, kind of. And so let's record just like something really simple. Right, so we'll record. Wow, expressive medium. Let's go back to sustain for a second. That was fun. Right, so we have this part. We could come through. Let's move that up and say, you know, I want these ones to be staccato. Oh man, this, to be perfectly honest, it takes so much work sometimes to get these things to the point where some of the other plugins are going to be a lot faster. Ooh, dynamics on. So one thing to note is dynamics on via CC. This no longer works. You have to do that all with the CC data instead, unless I turn that off. So sometimes you don't want dynamics on via CC. You just want to do that with the velocity tool. Anyway, the point I was going to make. Let's look at the score for a second. And we'll switch this to page mode. And we will zoom out and go up, right? So you can see on the score, right here, we have these little dots for staccato, right? And so we can come through with some of these things that we have loaded here with our articulation set. Say we want to do something that's marcato, right? I don't know. Let's see. Let's see if that may or may not be. I think this is it right here. Actually. So let's delete that other one. So it's blue. Can I move it now? Nope. Just delete it or. Ooh, don't work in the score enough. So we go back just a little bit. So because we did that, added that note on there, you can see my articulation for the note before. It says sustain. I click on this next one, and now it says marcato long, which means that any of these things that are built into the articulation set, if we draw these on the score, it's going to use them in the actual MIDI notes. And so you could work at this with a score approach rather than just a MIDI or other data approach. And I know a lot of people really are interested in this. So let's switch this back over for a minute to the string, or the string studio strings. And we'll put this on violin 1. Let me change my articulation set to violins. Boom. And then let's look at the dialogue for this. You'll see we could add more if we wanted to. I don't think pizzicato right now has anything. So let's do pizzicato. Like that. So if we were to do that inside the score, then it would switch it to the pizzicato and move on like that. We can also really edit some of these down. So here's the articulation we choose. Here's the mode. So we can make it switch permanently or just go while we're pushing it. And then we can also do everything from velocity being the trigger to change the articulation. So if we play softer, it'll be one articulation. As we play louder, it can switch to a different articulation. It can be aftertouch, or it can be a continuous controller. So like a breath controller could switch this, or it could be polyphonic aftertouch if we have an MPE device. So we have a bunch of different options here, and really you can customize that all you want. It just takes a little time to do it. Do you all have time to sit around doing articulations? No. I don't. And then we have an output for that as well. Speaking of some of those things, it's been a long time since I've thought about this. So I don't know if I can find it right away, but there are some other MIDI controls that we can do this with. Let me think about this. Score project settings. MIDI meeting. MIDI meaning. So if you put any of these on in the score, you can set to what it will do in terms of velocity and length of the note. So we do have a few other things here. We can make things jump up in velocity or go down in velocity from what the original note is. And so we do have this other functionality here that can be useful with some of the string patches if we want to put those in the score at any time. Something like Cubase or Nuendo does this better. Even like, I think there's other, it's like just an expanded palette of what you can do with it. So for better or worse, we have some MIDI meeting and articulation design, but it's certainly more limited than some of the other big players in that area. Cool. I'm trying to think what else there is. I don't know if I've got a song. I don't think I have it loaded in right this moment. I use strings on a number of songs, and I usually use like just patches that are full orchestra for ease. If I come down to the play for a minute, this is my string engine of choice for the most part. I've got the Hollywood strings and I've got the symphonic orchestra strings, the platinum version. Diamond and platinum, but I mean, it's like really nice to have the full strings, which sound great. But then we also have all of the different things. So one of the things that Logic doesn't have a great amount of is like an individual string. Even this one, to get a solo instrument, you have to get like an expanded version. I don't think here. So we have sections with some solo instruments, but the Hollywood ones don't. You have to get like the solo instrument separately. But for this one, like for instance, we have solo violin, either key switch, which means I play a key and it changes the articulation, or we have like, we can do this with the mod wheel. So either vibrato, no vibrato. Let's do vibrato, replace. So a lot of mod wheel work doing the crossfading between samples. The key switching, on the other hand, would be all these blue notes at the bottom. I mean, that doesn't sound exactly like a violinist, but dang, it sounds way better than anything Logic has built into it. So I think certainly some real strengths to having a third-party instrument. And understanding that, look at each of these things in the library here, right? It's like we have all these things in here. So I go to the orchestra strings, and then I've got all of these folders, and it's got like 3 cellos in one group, or 4 violins, or 9 double basses, or 10 cellos, or 10 violas, 11 violins, 18 violins. So I go into one of those, right? And then I've got long, short effects, the mod wheel, crossfaded effects, key switching, and the old key switching for compatibility. So let's go into there. And then I've got all these. You have to learn a code for these because some of them mean things like, the emotional, DFX1, DFX2, the expressive fast, the expressive legato with accented. I mean, it's like, let's choose this one. We'll come down to replace. I mean, cool. But we want a little different flavor. And so you got to like learn this as an instrument. You don't just get to look at the word and be like, oh, that's going to be it. It's like you actually have to know which of these things are which. And figure that out. Or experiment with it like every single time. And so, yeah, this is great. There's so much great stuff in here, but there's also a lot of things which are limitations in some ways. Trying to think. It's nice. This bank is nice. Now, East West has got the new Opus engine that has even more things with like a more automated arranging tool. It's really great. Right this moment, I don't have my license renewed for it, but eventually, it's like when a project comes along, I re-up it for a month and use it and do the project and then get out. But I have all of these like permanently purchased, and so it's nice to be able to just pull those out when I need them. And their stuff, I mean, some of it sounds a little dated now. Some of it sounds amazing no matter when you use it, but it's nice to be able to have some options. Okay, so any other thoughts or questions? Let me know. We're about to wrap up here in the next like 3 to 5 minutes, unless we start an amazing discussion that keeps it going. But I think apart from what I would call a lack of great examples of the Logic instruments. So we walked through how to use them and much of what the different pieces of each plugin mean, but I don't think it's like I need to make some demos of them in like use in a really good light, but I don't use them all that much because they are rough around the edges. And so knowing what they're capable of and then actually like spending the time. I have used the saxophone and the trumpets and other things with the studio horns in a few different projects. And I mean, it's hard to get a good saxophone. And I think that these ones in a mix do a decent job, I would say. And the section sounds are decent. I mean, they're okay. know, I mean, they're one of the coolest things is probably on the key sound. That would probably make somebody believe they're real. Because nobody would believe that a sample library would have all of that click. Okay, let's pull the plug. Looks like everybody else has pulled it already. Thanks for watching. Like I said, if you're interested in more content like this, make sure you subscribe. We do a random collection of live streams, usually either in the middle of the day Mountain Standard Time, or I guess Mountain Daylight Savings Time right now, and evening times, and then weekly non-live stream content. So if you're interested in Logic, this is one of the places to be, where we try to do things that not everybody else is doing. Anyway, thanks so much for watching. Have a good night, or day, or whatever.